Back in those days, the heart of Israel had strayed, submerged in the shadows of a forgotten faith. I, Gideon, witnessed my own people, whom I loved dearly, succumb to the allure of Baal. It was a time of spiritual desolation, where altars once raised to the heavens were now ruins cloaked in idolatry. Born and raised in Manasseh, within Joshua's family fold, I watched as our ancestral values were swapped for foreign rituals, each offering to pagan gods a deep cut into our covenant with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The promised land, once flowing with milk and honey, now groaned under the weight of neglect. Crops were dwindling, the skies withheld their rains, and the prosperity of the past was now a distant echo, suffocated by the cruel dominance of the Midianites. These invaders, as brutal as the false god we worshipped, plundered our lands, taking the fruits of our labor, our dignity, leaving behind only despair and fear. In the midst of this chaos, I hid, threshing wheat in a winepress, a place for wine transformed into a hiding spot, a symbol of how low we had fallen. It was there, in the oppressive silence of that scene, that the cry for liberation grew ever stronger within me. Because, despite the darkness that enveloped us, a faint flame of hope still burned, the promise that God would not abandon us. And it was in this setting of pain that the heavens decided to act, choosing the least expected among many to be the voice of awakening. I, a mere man among the shadows, was about to be called to something I could never have imagined. In the winepress, as I hid my fear alongside the grain, the fate of Israel was about to change, and with it, my entire life. As the sun set over the land of Manasseh, my heart knew, something grand was coming, and it would be I, Gideon, the spark for the redemption of my people. At that time, I was just another one of the forgotten, a young man from Abiezer, working under the veil of secrecy. Each grain of wheat I threshed in the winepress was not just an act of sustenance but a silent resistance against the Midianites who ravaged our land. They knew no bounds in their cruelty, and we, marked by fear and oppression, sought only to survive. I, Gideon, hidden in the shadow of a winepress not meant for wheat, felt the weight of my cowardice press against my chest. With every strike on the wheat, a whisper of fear escaped my soul, fearing that at any moment, the voracious eyes of the Midianites might discover the little I had left. My life was a constant shadow, moving stealthily, always on the lookout for dangers. The stories of the great deeds of our ancestors, which once shone like stars in the sky of our history, now seemed distant, almost mythological. I wondered if the God who had guided them through the sea and the desert still remembered us. In that hidden labor, I was neither a hero nor a warrior. I was a fearful son, a man who trembled in the face of adversity. Yet, in that obscurity, where sweat mixed with the dust of wheat, a glimpse of something greater began to take shape. With each seed that escaped from the torn bags, a seed of faith began to sprout in my heart. For even in the depths of my fear, part of me yearned to believe that we were not abandoned, that somehow, for some reason, I, a mere wheat thresher, could have a role in the redemption we cried out for. And it was in this hideaway, my makeshift refuge, that the eyes of heaven finally met mine. On a day like any other, as I labored at the winepress, hiding the wheat from the predatory eyes of the Midianites, a stranger burst into my solitude. There was no premonition of his arrival, no tremor in the earth or sign in the skies, just the sudden presence of someone whose aura was so intense it seemed to defy reality itself. "Hail, mighty warrior! The Lord is with you," he said. My first reaction was fear, a reflection of my constant anxiety. For a moment, I thought to flee, to hide deeper in the shadows that had so far been my companions. But something in the visitor's voice, firm yet imbued with an inexplicable kindness, made me stay. How could I, Gideon, a man accustomed to hiding, be called valiant? "Forgive me, my lord," I stammered, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this befallen us? And where are all the wonders our fathers told us about?" He looked at me with an intensity that seemed to penetrate my soul, and his response was a direct call not just to what I was, but to what I could become. "Go in this might of yours and you will save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?" In his gaze, I saw not the reflection of the man I knew, full of doubts and fears, but the image of the man I could become. The promise of his presence was like a beacon in my storm of uncertainties. "Behold, I will be with you," he affirmed, "and you shall strike the Midianites as one man." At that moment, something inside me awoke. A flame, long suppressed by the ashes of despair, began to burn. It was the spark of courage, a glimpse of what it meant not just to survive, but to conquer. Though I trembled, part of me dared to believe in the truth of those words. I, Gideon, the most unlikely of leaders, was being called to something greater than my own story of fears and escapes. It was the beginning of a journey that would shape not only my fate but that of my entire people. And as the divine visitor disappeared, leaving behind only the echo of his promise, I knew that nothing in my life would be the same again. It was the start of a new era, an awakening to the true strength that resided in me, and that I was now beginning to recognize. That night, after receiving the divine call, my heart pulsed with a mix of awe and determination. The voice of the angel of the Lord still echoed in my ears, compelling me to act. I knew what needed to be done, although my entire being trembled at the magnitude of the task. The altar of Baal, standing proud in our land, was the symbol of our apostasy, the physical representation of our betrayal to the God of our fathers. I gathered 10 of my servants under the cover of darkness, for I still lacked the courage to face such a venture in the light of day. The night, with its accompanying shadows, seemed the only ally to the fear that still plagued me. Armed with tools that resembled weapons at that decisive moment, we approached the altar. Each step seemed to echo not just upon the earth but also within my soul. As we arrived, the nocturnal silence was shattered by the sound of our tools against the stone. Each strike was a cry of freedom, an act of war against the chains that had imprisoned our spirits. The altar of Baal, erected to worship a god who enslaved us, began to crumble under our determined efforts. We replaced the profane altar with a new one, built in honor of the true God, using stones purified by our repentance and renewed faith. However, by dawn, as the sunlight revealed the extent of our audacity, the city was stirred by the wrath of my own countrymen. They, who once called me brother and friend, now clamored for my head, thirsty for vengeance for the destruction of their idol. "Bring Gideon," they shouted, as my father, Joash, faced the enraged crowd. It was then that a greater force took hold of me, a conviction that transcended my initial fear. My father, challenging the mob, defended the act, challenging them to defend Baal if indeed he was a god, to let him fight for his own cause. His defense not only saved my life but also marked the beginning of a change within our people. If Baal was a god, why couldn't he defend his own altar? This trial by fire, this first decisive action in my walk of faith, not only challenged the idolatry consuming my people but also ignited the flame of a new resistance within me. Fear had been my constant companion, but now, by the grace of God, I began to see the power of a faith truly lived. It was the dawn of a new day, both for me and for Israel. After facing the altar of Baal and the wrath of my countrymen, a new dawn brought with it both the promise and the weight of the mission that had been entrusted to me. The magnitude of the task before me made my heart oscillate between faith and uncertainty. Even though the divine call echoed in my mind, I, Gideon, sought a more tangible confirmation, something I could touch and see, to strengthen my conviction in the face of such immense challenges. It was then that I pleaded with the Lord for a sign, a test that could dispel any shadow of doubt in my heart. I placed a piece of wool fleece on the dry ground, and made a simple yet profound supplication: "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, behold, I am placing a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground around it is dry, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have spoken." That night, as darkness enveloped the camp, the sky seemed to hold its secrets, and I waited with bated breath. At the break of day, I hurried to the threshing floor, and to my astonishment and relief, the fleece was soaked with dew, so heavy that when squeezed, it filled a bowl with water, while the ground around it remained dry and thirsty. Yet, a residue of doubt still tormented my peace. Driven by a need for complete certainty, I cried out to the Lord again: "Do not be angry with me, and I will speak to you just once more. I ask you to do the opposite, let the fleece alone be dry, and let there be dew on all the ground." And so God did. That second night, exactly as I had requested, the reverse occurred. The fleece remained dry while the ground around it was covered with dew. These signs, simple in form but profound in meaning, not only strengthened my faith but also assured me of God's presence and promise. With renewed certainty, my soul found the firm foundation needed to move forward. I knew now, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the divine hand guided each step of my journey, preparing the way for what was to come. In my quest for certainty, I found more than signs. I found the confirmation of a calling that would define not only my destiny but the destiny of an entire people. Armed with divine assurance, my heart was inflamed, ready to face the Midianites. Men of Israel joined me, coming from all parts, a sea of determined faces, numbering in the thousands. However, what followed was a teaching that would challenge not just my faith but also human logic. Amidst that vast assembly, the Lord spoke to me, "The people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel boast against me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.'" I confess that at that moment, my certainties wavered. How could we face such a numerous and cruel enemy with less than the maximum of our forces? Instructed by the Lord, I then proclaimed, "Whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return and depart from Mount Gilead." To my surprise, a large number of men descended, leaving us still with a considerable number, but not for the end that God had in view. The Lord spoke to me again, saying, "There are still too many people." He then led the remaining men to the waters, where he proposed a peculiar test. "Everyone who laps the water with his tongue, as a dog laps, you shall set by himself, likewise, everyone who kneels down to drink." Of the thousands, only 300 men drank in the manner prescribed. With just 300 by my side, a veil of disbelief could easily have fallen upon me. But, strengthened by the signs of the fleece, I understood that true strength is not found in the multitude, but in the presence of the Almighty. These 300 were not chosen for their strength or skill but for their willingness to be instruments in God's hands. Each man there, by my side, was about to become part of a victory that would be recounted through generations, an eternal proof that, in God's economy, less is more when God directs the battle. Thus, with 300 men, we were ready to face an army, not with the strength of arms but with the certainty that each step was ordained by the Lord. It was a divine strategy, where true greatness lay not in numbers, but in faith. In the dead of night, while the Midianite camp lay in careless slumber, I and my 300 men prepared for a battle that would challenge all conventions of warfare. Armed not with swords or spears, but with trumpets, clay jars, and blazing torches, we were ready to execute a plan that could only have been inspired by God Himself. Each of us carried a trumpet in one hand and a jar covering a torch in the other. The fear that had previously plagued me had transformed into fervent anticipation. There was something deeply symbolic and powerful in our simple armament. It was not a strategy of strength, but of faith. We divided into 3 companies, surrounding the vast enemy camp under the cloak of darkness. The moon, our only witness, seemed to approve our intent with its silvery light. The silence of the night was almost palpable, a prelude to the upheaval we were about to cause. At the moment I determined, the signal was given. Suddenly, the night was torn by the thunderous sound of the trumpets, each blast a cry of defiance and a declaration of war. Simultaneously, we broke the jars, revealing the torches that shone like newly born stars in the darkness. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Midianite camp plunged into chaos. The enemies, awakened from their sleep by the cacophony and sudden lights, were seized by total panic. The confusion was such that they began to fight among themselves, their minds clouded by fear and surprise. We, though vastly outnumbered, were like a celestial army that night, each torch a flame of justice, each sound of the trumpet a declaration of God's power. The strategy, though devoid of conventional weapons, was a masterpiece of divine cunning. We used the element of surprise, fear, and darkness itself as our most effective weapons, turning our numerical disadvantage into a tactical advantage. At that moment, I deeply understood that our battle did not depend on physical strength, but on wisdom and power that could only come from above. Thus, with trumpets, jars, and torches, we faced an army far greater than ours. And that night, victory was within our reach, not by our skill, but because every step was imbued with the unshakable faith that God was with us. It was a demonstration not just of faith, but of a cunning that transcends human understanding. As the shadows of the night deepened, my heart pulsed with a mix of adrenaline and a profound sense of purpose. I, Gideon, along with my 300 men, were strategically positioned around the vast encampment of the Midianites. The tension was palpable, each one of us aware of the crucial role we would play at that decisive hour. The silence of the night was our ally, our movements so stealthy that even the soft whisper of the wind seemed loud in comparison. The stars twinkled in the sky, silent witnesses to the impending moment. I held my trumpet firmly, feeling the weight of the jar in my other hand, the torch inside eager to reveal its light. Then, at the agreed signal, which came like a soft sigh of the night breeze, the tranquility was shattered. The sound of 300 trumpets sounded like thunder, a war cry that tore through the darkness, vibrating through the valley with a force that seemed to shake the very heavens. Simultaneously, the jars were shattered, and the torches emerged, blazing and bright against the night, a spectacle of fire and sound that turned night into day. The Midianite camp was engulfed by a wave of chaos and confusion. The enemy warriors, awakened from their slumber by the sudden clamor, found themselves surrounded by lights and sounds that seemed to come from a much larger army than ours. Overcome by fear and disorientation, they began to fight amongst themselves, their swords finding the bodies of their own companions in the rampant confusion. We, though few, remained motionless, maintaining our positions around the camp, our torches lit as beacons of victory. The blare of the trumpets continued, each note played with the certainty that we were not only announcing the defeat of our enemies but also proclaiming divine intervention in the battle. Those moments seemed eternal, each second stretched by the intensity of what was happening. But as dawn began to stain the sky with the first lights of morning, it became evident that the battle had been decided without the need for conventional force. The Midianite camp was in ruins, not by the strength of arms, but by the power of faith and the fear we had instilled in their hearts. That night, victory was ours, a victory that did not rely on numerical superiority or brute strength, but on the certainty that the God of Israel fought for us. And as the sun rose, bathing the battlefield in its golden light, we knew that more than a military battle had been won, a spiritual battle had been gained, and the power of God had been manifested in a glorious and indisputable way. When the dust of battle settled and the sounds of war quieted, we were enveloped in an atmosphere charged with reverence and admiration. I, Gideon, who once secretly threshed wheat, now found myself at the center of acclamations and praise. My people, inspired by the divine victory we had achieved, looked to me not just as a leader, but as a savior. With hearts inflamed by gratitude and the miracles witnessed, the leaders and the people of Israel came to me with a request I never imagined receiving. They wanted me to assume the reign over them, for me and my descendants to rule as monarchs. Reign over us, they clamored, for you have saved us from the hand of the Midianites. The temptation of power is subtle and seductive, and I confess that for a moment, the idea of reigning as a king over Israel stirred my flesh. It would have been so easy to yield to the people's clamor, to accept the insignia of power and establish my house as a royal dynasty. But as I pondered, my heart was touched by a firm and clear remembrance of that lonely night at the winepress and the words of the angel that changed the course of my life. In deep introspection, I knew that true victory did not lie in power or authority over men. True victory was in recognizing that all power and all conquest come from the Lord. My response, therefore, came not from a heart inclined to power, but from a humble and grateful spirit. I will not reign over you, nor will my son reign over you. The Lord will reign over you. My words were an echo of the commitment I made at the beginning of my journey, to serve God's purpose and not my own. The refusal to take the crown was perhaps the most powerful decision I made, for it reaffirmed God's sovereignty over Israel and over my own heart. By rejecting the throne, I reinforced my faith and that of my people in divine leadership, teaching them that our security and prosperity would not be guaranteed through human kings, but through faithful adherence to our God, who is the true King of Israel. This act of humility not only defined my legacy but also strengthened the covenant between God and his people, a perennial reminder that in God alone we must trust and to him alone we must serve. Looking back on the paths the Lord has led me, I see a journey marked not by my own heroic deeds, but by God's extraordinary grace. I, Gideon, began as a man dominated by fear, hidden in the humblest of roles, threshing wheat in a winepress, far from the eyes of oppressors. But it was in that corner of fear and obscurity that God's voice found me, calling me to a mission that seemed beyond my capabilities. My journey was not just about liberating Israel from the Midianites, it was a personal transformation, shaped by faith and the power of the Holy Spirit. With each step taken in obedience, I felt more empowered, not by human strength, but by a power that can only come from above. The call to destroy the altar of Baal, the confirmation of the fleece, the reduction of my army, and the divine strategy to confuse the enemy, each stage was a test and a proof of faith. My story is a testament that God does not choose the equipped, he equips the chosen. He sees beyond appearances, reaching hearts willing to follow his call, regardless of their insecurities and limitations. And just as he did with me, he continues to do with all those who are willing to trust in his word and walk his paths. The legacy I leave is not that of a ruler or conqueror, but of a man who, amidst doubts and fears, learned to depend entirely on God. I hope my story inspires others to see that no matter the circumstances, the strength to face giants and win battles does not come from us, but from the Lord. It is my prayer that future generations look upon what was accomplished through my life not as an exaltation of the man named Gideon, but as a celebration of God's power and faithfulness. May they remember me as a testament to what God can do with a life surrendered to him, a life that began in the shadows but was called into the light to show that in God, we all can be mighty warriors. If you are moved by powerful and transformative narratives based on the stories of the Bible, this is the place for you. Subscribe now to our channel and hit the bell to receive notifications whenever we post a new video. Join our community and be part of this journey of faith, hope, and inspiration. Join this spiritual adventure and let the biblical stories enrich your life. We look forward to seeing you.